one of the shuttered studios in particular just created a hit game, did really well on Game Pass in terms of engagement, and won a ton of awards. Shouldn't succeeding in that way ensure the future of a studio?
One of the things I really love about the games industry is it's a creative art form.
Well, I think we found it. We found the reason why modern gaming feels so damn soulless right now. If you haven't heard, Xbox's president Sarah Bond went on the record with Bloomberg a few weeks back and gave one of the most disgustingly tone-deaf corporate speak-filled interviews I've ever seen. And believe me, I work a corporate job too, so I deal with stuff like this on the regular, but this takes the cake in terms of being one of the most cringeworthy discussions I've ever seen. Throughout the interview, she avoided so many questions and meandered her way through the session like a college kid desperately trying to make stuff up on the fly when a professor calls on them to answer during class. The so-called reporter from Bloomberg didn't even push the president of Xbox to respond to the questions directly, which honestly just made me die a little inside when I watched the interview in full. She straight up just ignores questions posed by the reporter and even responds with completely unrelated nonsense which the reporter just somehow accepts and just moves on to another question. Why? I don't understand it. Bloomberg is not Xbox's PR team and should not be running defense for Xbox, because if the president is unable to answer basic questions about the industry and the studios which were affected by their decision, the reporter should have definitely pushed her to answer the questions directly instead of, letting her get away with murder here. Anyway, if you take a look at the likes and comments, you'll see that the community is largely in agreement that this interview just sucked. Setting the stage, a few weeks ago, Xbox announced that they'd be closing a number of studios. Among them was Arcane Austin, which was responsible for the failure that is Redfall. People saw this coming from a mile away. People didn't expect news of the shuttering of Tango Gameworks as well, the studio behind The Evil Within and Hi-Fi Rush, the only game to win Xbox an award the past year. Just putting that in. Naturally, people were very pissed about this decision as the game was both a commercial and critical success, and that they felt the closure was unjustified. This interview could have provided the prime opportunity to the Xbox team to clear the air almost and set the record straight with gamers everywhere on why these studios were closed down. What's baffling about this is that not only didn't she capitalize on this opportunity, but ended up making the situation worse by revealing that she, the head of Xbox, barely understands the industry as a whole. I believe that the comment which summarizes this best is shown here. There is something truly distasteful about someone working at such a high position who doesn't even care about the industry that she's in. Exactly, and I couldn't have said it better myself. Even just listening to her talk, I don't get the feeling that she's well equipped to lead a gaming company due to her simply refusing to answer basic questions and vomiting out word salad whenever she doesn't know what to say. Anyway, there were a few main questions asked throughout this interview, and I'll do my best to analyze and provide a corporate translation of the speech that she used throughout the interview. So let's get started. But before that, if you like this kind of content, please drop a like and subscribe as it really helps the channel and you'll never miss another upload. Okay, on to the video.
CEO Phil Spencer had been raising kind of the alarm that the video game industry is just not growing, and there's a real need to figure out how to reverse that. What's causing the issue, and how does Xbox turn it around?
Yeah, the last year or so in video games, largely the industry's been flat. And even in 2023, we saw just some tremendous releases, tremendously groundbreaking games, but still the growth didn't follow all of that.
Okay, so when she says the industry's been flat and growth didn't follow, what she's trying to communicate is that Xbox is struggling to hit its revenue targets. However, instead of attributing it to a lack of competitive titles being released on Xbox or any valid justification for this lack of growth, she directs the blame for this to a lack of growth within the gaming industry in general. If you have done a quick Google search, you will have figured out that this is incorrect. Gaming is growing at a rapid pace, with the industry reaching upwards of $300 billion within the next few years. Which brings me to my next point, right? How could the president of Xbox not know that gaming is booming right now? I just don't get it. It's such a simple fact that, like I said earlier, a Google search could have answered the question better than she could. I also find it very, very funny that she's essentially correlating the lack of growth within Xbox as a lack of industry growth at large, which is in itself wrong, but let's move on.
Xbox announced the shuttering of 4 game studios. I know you're not the studio's chief, but how should gamers understand that move in terms of Microsoft's commitment to developing innovative exclusive games?
Yeah, it's always extraordinarily hard when you have to make decisions like that. I'll go back to what I was saying about the industry, and when we looked at those fundamental trends, we feel a deep responsibility to ensure that the games we make, the devices we build, the services that we offer are there through moments, even when the industry isn't growing and when you're through a time of transition.
Okay, so if you didn't understand the point that she was trying to make, that's fine, because honestly there isn't a coherent point that she made through her response at all. All she's trying to do is really pacify and calm down tensions by positioning Xbox in a sympathetic light. Think of it as, oh no, we didn't really want to close those studios, but we had to. Anyway, she could have provided the numbers, the stats, the costs, anything to justify their decision and answer the damn question. Instead, she points the finger at fundamental trends and that the industry isn't growing once again, which we already disproved in the previous section anyway, so let's move on. Another contradiction that I'd like to point out in this word spaghetti is her mentioning that Xbox, quote,
we feel a deep responsibility to ensure that the games we make, the devices we build, the services that we offer are there through moments, even when the industry isn't growing and when you're through a time of transition.
I'm gonna pause it right there. That makes zero sense when you think about it. How can you ensure that the full ensemble of Xbox's games and services are available even in times of industry stagnation when you close down studios who have performed well in a time of industry growth? It just doesn't make any sense to me. With that being the case though, that is a perfect segue into the next question.
One of the shuttered studios in particular just created a hit game, did really well on Game Pass and in terms of engagement, and won a ton of awards. Shouldn't succeeding in that way ensure the future of a studio?
One of the things I really love about the games industry is it's a creative art form. And it means that the situation and what success is for each game and studio is also really unique. Like, there's no one size fits all to it for us. And so we look at each studio, each game team, and we look at a whole variety of factors when we're faced with sort of making decisions and trade-offs like that.
If you thought that the previous sections were bad, I sincerely apologize for ruining your day even further. I would translate this, but she's not really saying anything of value here and is just talking to fill the space. Nothing she mentions in this whole 1-minute response even comes close to answering the question presented by the reporter. She was asked a direct, and to the reporter's credit, timely question about a successful studio being shut down. She didn't answer the question again and instead went on a completely unrelated tangent about why she loves the gaming industry and that it's a creative space. This isn't even relevant to the question being asked. If the irony couldn't be worse, she says,
and what success is for each game and studio is also really unique.
Let's discuss that a little bit further. What defines a successful game studio? I would say that a studio that performed commercially well, won awards for the publisher, and is a generally well-loved studio in terms of the games that they've produced for the community should amount to some form of success, right? Apparently, all of these guesses are incorrect because they decided to close Tango anyway. What's infuriating to me, and I hope many others, is that she's not equipped to answer this question at all and has to resort to essentially spamming corporate speak to try and sound like she understands what's going on. But let's move on.
Many of the hardcore long-term customers are worried. They're worried about the release on other platforms. They're worried that that may indicate that Xbox is defocusing its own hardware. What do you say to them? How do you make them feel like Xbox is still for them?
Specific to core gamers, my focus has really been on engineering and building that next generation hardware experience that really taps in to their needs.
And finally, the last question. To the reporter's credit, once again, this is a really good question and really relevant to Xbox right now as they've been struggling to stay competitive. Unfortunately, our dear president fumbles the metaphorical bag once again. This doesn't require much translation, she's just saying that her focus as the leader of Xbox is to build better hardware. That's all well and good, and again, to the president's credit, she actually answered a question for once, which is great. But what good is better hardware when you have no competitive or exclusive titles to play on this new console? Gone are the glory days of the Halo series, and with it, so has the competitiveness of the Xbox console. Because if you think about it, why buy an Xbox when you can get better hardware and performance using a PC? Why buy an Xbox when PlayStation and Sony have far better console exclusives? I would have loved to hear her thoughts on this as the leader of Xbox, but she doesn't provide any insight into the real reasons Xbox is struggling to stay competitive in the market. Instead, if you go further into the interview, she even shares that her main goal revolves around the preservation and making sure that gamers can bring the games with them wherever they go and invest time in those games that they choose. I don't know if I'm nitpicking here, but this doesn't really seem to make much sense because if you've bought a game, you'll either receive a hard copy or a digital copy which you can take with you in the long run as long as you have access to your Steam library or something like that. Unless of course she's talking about doing away with the need for always online single player games, which I honestly doubt is the case. Anyway, I believe that this isn't a problem that needs to be solved and that the goals of Xbox's president don't really align in terms of addressing the real issues which are causing the company to struggle in such a competitive market space. So let's end on a positive note. If you take anything away from this video, I want it to be that if someone like her can be paid millions of dollars to basically spout nonsense, you can be anything you want to be. Going back to the topic though, I think that this interview perfectly highlights the reason why Xbox is in such a sorry state nowadays. Especially when you consider that the people at the very highest levels of the company leadership are seemingly so incompetent at their jobs, it's no surprise that the company is on a slow decline. From not knowing basic facts about your industry to refusing to answer relevant, timely questions about the decision the company has made, I genuinely worry for the future of Xbox. I remember back in secondary school or high school, I used to beg my parents to buy a console for me when I was a kid. I wanted it to be an Xbox last time because I remember my friends were all raving about playing multiplayer together. I wonder if my kids will even know what an Xbox is in the next few years, because if you ask me, if Xbox's leadership doesn't change, this ship is bound to sink sooner or later. And that's the video. Thanks so much for making it to the end, and yes, I'm looking forward to hearing what you think in the comments below. So yes, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.